Jason, thank you so much for coming in studio.
Thank you, Crystal, for having me.
Look, we've gotten off to a great start, guys. We're talking about selfies and photos and all those kinds of things. But Jason, I want to talk a little bit about your story and how you got into music. I know you heard the song Sweet Home Alabama and you wanted to play it. You started playing your guitar, and then what happened from there?
Well, I started playing guitar when I was 16, and my family had always been in music. My dad's a singer. My uncle plays piano. My other uncle played guitar. And so at an early age, everybody would sit around the piano at my grandmother's house and just play Allman Brothers tunes and old gospel tunes and different things. And so I was raised around that. And when I heard that song, I said, you know what, I want to play guitar. And so at 16 years old, I bought my first guitar, and it was kind of a Les Paul copy. And my dad said, after I guess I'd been playing for about 6 months, and he said, look, if you learn how to play that song Jessica by the Allman Brothers, I'll buy you a new guitar. And sure thing, he did. He bought me another guitar. I think he was thinking that I was actually going to come to him in maybe a couple of weeks, but when I came to him that afternoon, he was like, well, okay, I'll buy you one.
Right, and clearly, I mean, you have a gift to be self-taught and to learn on your own. So outside of the inspiration around the home with music, how does music really touch you?
Well, I think it's the universal language that God has given us. And for me, I think that you could set a million people up and play music, and we're all going to relate in some kind of way. I think it moves the soul in a way that it's just, you just really can't explain it. It's very spiritual to me.
And so you started going around Atlanta. You were playing, and then before you knew it, you were in a group.
Right. Well, at 16, I learned how to play guitar, and a couple of years later, I started playing in a band, and then I went to college for a little while, and then I started playing with a band that actually toured around, and we played at sorority and fraternities, college circuit, and I really started partying a lot at that point. And I started drinking earlier when I was I guess about 16, and it wasn't that I wanted to drink. My dad was an alcoholic, and he's been sober over 20 years now, which is great. But at that point, when I first took my drink, I didn't want to actually drink. It was just a matter of like I wanted to fit in. But when I drank, what happened is it kind of gave me that liquid courage. I felt better. I looked better, inside. Well, I thought so. But I kept on drinking for a while, and by the time I got in the band and started touring around, it was just what you did. Drugs and alcohol became a part of it, and especially when you're partying almost every night. And before long, I started getting a pretty good habit, and at that point, you kind of look back and go, how did I get here, But I didn't really think any time that I got in, trouble that it was really a problem. But the thing is I didn't get in trouble every time I was drinking or using drugs, but when I did get in trouble, it was because of those things. So it did cause some problems in my life.
Now I want to talk a little bit more about that, because you say you started out drinking, and how did that transition to actually drug use?
Well, I just liked the way that it changed the way that I felt. It kind of took away the fear, like I was talking about, that liquid courage and everything. And so it was just the next step, because I've always wanted and been searching for something more. And I was trying to fill up. I see now when I look back in my life that a lot of things that I was doing out there were to fill up this place that I had inside of me that I think was made for God in a way, because all of us have that urge to want to find a spiritual sense about us. But I was trying to fill it up with things that I thought were going to make me happy. But they really didn't make me happy.
That's interesting, Jason, because you grew up in a Christian home.
Right.
Right. And so when you say that there was a void there spiritually, what do you feel may have been the disconnect growing up? Was it?
Well, actually, I continued going to church and went to a Christian school until I was around 16 or 17 when I started really drinking and moving on to drugs. And I think that what had happened is it kind of gave me a false sense of spirituality and blocked me off from what I really was. It kind of tricked me in a way, because it made me feel like that I was finding that love that I needed, but it really wasn't. It was kind of lying to me.
Now, you did share with me just now, and I did not know that about your dad actually having an alcohol addiction. As a young boy growing up in the house and seeing that, what impact do you think that had on you?
I said, I'm never going to drink. And I said, I'm never going to do that because I saw the effects that it had. And my dad is an amazing person. He's been sober over 20 years now. And thank God we got a relationship that is really, really amazing today. And, what God's done in his life and the transformation is amazing. But when I started drinking, I said, you know what? Before I started drinking, I said, I'm never going to do that because I saw the effects that it can have on a family, because you say things, you do things that maybe you normally wouldn't do. And that's, all of us at some point, and some people go a little bit extreme with it. But by the time that he had gotten to a place where he was just really bad off, that's where I said, I don't want to ever do that. But it tricked me when I drank. It made me feel like that I could do it, and I thought I could control it. And by the time that it grabbed a hold of me and really took me down, I didn't see that line. I looked back and I was like, how did this happen? So it's, it's cunning, baffling, and powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and so, you were having some successes in your band, and you guys got signed to a label that ultimately got purchased by Microsoft, and no more deal.
No more deal. See, I played in a band called Dirt Circus, and that was right before my other two bands, but I actually got kicked out of Dirt Circus for drinking and doing drugs, which, how do you get kicked out of a rock and roll band? But I did, and, my type of partying was a little bit more than everybody else's, and so I started two bands, and one of them was Ultraphonic, and we put a song on the internet and on GarageBand.com, ended up winning a record deal, and I thought that if I had the record deal, and I've always thought this once I started playing music and everything, if I have a record deal, my life is going to be okay. I got the record deal. We went into Muscle Shoals, recorded the album with the Swampers. That Sweet Home Alabama song, Muscle Shoals has got the Swampers, there's a line in there. And they've recorded Aretha Franklin, Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan. And we went in with Johnny Sandlin. Once we got finished, Microsoft did buy the label because they were buying a lot of internet companies. And by this time, I had a really big drug and alcohol problem. My family was in shambles. My relationships with them, and I was just trying to stay afloat. And I had the record deal, but I was still there. It was still me. No matter where I went, there I was. And so when they bought that, the record was shelved, and they didn't put it out. I had a big drug and alcohol problem. I had fallen in a place where I thought that it was going to keep me up and make me whole. It really didn't, and that's where all of the big problems started.
And Jason, I really want to explore, because there's deliverance in your testimony.
Absolutely.
And somebody's going to hear this and they're really going to be like, oh my God, this is me, this speaks to me. And so when you say you partied a little bit more than everybody else, like what was happening? Like what did a day look like for Jason who was abusing drugs?
Well, I mean, if you really want to get into it, when I woke up, I mean, I was smoking pot, and then I really, by the afternoon, I was drinking, and sometimes in the morning I would drink, but once I started, it would continue on from drinking to smoking pot to doing other drugs in a way that's the only way that I knew, because I started drinking and using drugs at an early age, and most of the things in my life that I had learned were based off of being high. And it was the fear killer at that moment. It was able to help me to cope with life and learn how to live. But by the time I got older, a lot of my life skills were revolved around drinking and using drugs in order to function. And so when those things started piling up my problems, and when they stopped working, when the drugs and alcohol stopped doing what I wanted them to do, because I was trying to control my feelings and trying to control everything, then I was left there with a bunch of stuff in my life that just really, a lot of the pain and everything. And so I was just really more or less drinking and using to function.
And so Jason, when you say like the pain, like what were some things that were going on, 16, 17, 21-year-old Jason? Like what was happening?
Well, in my life, when you party, and you may relate out there in the airwaves, anybody out there, when you party, sometimes you do things you don't like. Sometimes you do things and you wake up, especially if you party hard, you wake up and you're like, oh, I don't remember doing that, or I did this, or maybe you've hurt somebody. Well, after a while, and this is with everybody in life, after a while, all of those things in our life start to pile up. They start to leave, maybe they say we're only sick as our secrets. We develop a lot of secrets. We develop a lot of problems in our life if we don't confess them, if we don't admit them to other people, if we don't apologize to people, if we don't forgive people, if we hold resentments, and they just start piling up and they start creating these sores in our soul. And got to a place to where I would hear a song and it would just remind me of something that happened in my life, and I never dealt with it, and it would or I would smell something and it would remind me of a time that maybe in my life where I was hurt, and I didn't go and say something, to somebody. I didn't have that relationship like I do now with my father, and I didn't have a relationship with my family like I do now, even though I come from an amazing home. Like I said, my dad's been sober over 20 years. But I think that getting in a 12-step recovery program, and we'll get to that, that's really what helped me to get to a place to where I could deal with those problems.
And speaking of that, so the record is shelved, and boom, everything just kind of hits the fan for you. You're sleeping on the couch in a drug dealer's apartment, and then he kicks you out.
Yeah, there were a lot of those, and I was actually ended up homeless to where I didn't have any place to go. I was working right after I got the record deal. I was working after it was shelved and after the band broke up and everything. I had a couple of friends, and they allowed me to live with them, and then that didn't work out because I was partying and just doing whatever I wanted to do. And I got hooked up with a guy named Mill Cannon, and he's a friend of mine, but he has done several videos for Whitney Houston, TLC, Tony Braxton, Usher, and he just recently did some stuff with Carrie Underwood. But he was starting a record label as well, and he had a lot of good networking people there. And he had me at a place where he said, I want you to record a record. And they had an intervention with me because the drugs and alcohol had gotten so bad that they had to tell me that they couldn't do it anymore. And I was hurt. And so I ended up going even further and further homeless. And what I mean by that is literally nowhere to go, and living out on the streets. And I got kicked out of a drug dealer's house. You're correct on that. I was sleeping out front of the house, and they said, "Look, you gotta go." And so I was sitting there in the middle of Atlanta on Boulevard, and I had my beat up guitar, and I had nowhere to go. I was crying. It was raining outside, and I was lost. I was hopeless, and I said, God, whoever you are, whatever you are, please help me out, because I cannot do this anymore. And I meant it with everything that I had. I had alienated everybody and everything in my life, including myself, and I had walked away from a relationship with God. And next thing I know, a couple weeks later, I was in a rehab recovery center in Athens, Georgia.
And it's not just a rehab recovery, but it was a Christian rehab recovery center. And there you did a lot of praying and meditating. How did the prayer and the meditation help you with your process of recovery?
Well, I didn't realize that I had prayed until I had been sober for about 3 or 4 months, because my mind was cloudy, and I wanted a vacation. I wanted to get better, and I wanted a place to become whole again. Well, what had happened is when I knocked on the door, God, he opened up the door and got me in rehab, and I actually started getting my life back together through a Christ-based recovery program called Celebrate Recovery. It's a 12-step program that basically gets us right with God, ourselves, and others, and teaches us how to trust in him, to clean house inside, and to help others. And so through prayer and meditation, within 6 months, I said, I went to a men's conference, and I said, look, I want you to run my life, and I asked Jesus into my heart, and I was like, I want this to be my life now, because I thought I was dead. I was dead inside, and I'd OD'd a couple of times, and when I got into recovery and started really getting my life back, I tell people it's like a country song backwards, because I started getting a relationship with my family, my friends, started getting a car back, and different things in my life that I was just amazed at. And so through prayer and devotions, I started getting healing, and started doing the things in life that that were getting me back to a place to where I had some life skills, and it talks about that in the Bible. The Beatitudes are where the 12-step AA program comes from, as well as the 12-step programs for Celebrate Recovery. And so through prayer and meditation and going to meetings and the inventory was a big part of it. You learn to trust God. When I took my third step, what that is when I turned my will and my life over to God, I thought it was going to be a grandiose thing. I said, I'm going to go into a church and they're going to have lights coming through the curtains.
The angels just going to come and
they come down. And, it reminded me of being out there and a drug addict, rock star, homeless rock star who thinks he's everything but has nothing. And so I thought that was going to happen. And my accountability partner, sponsor, took me outside. It was raining. I knelt down and I turned my will over to God. And then from that point, I did an inventory and I looked at all those dark places in my life that I was carrying around. I looked at all those dark places that I had never dealt with, and I wrote them down, took an inventory, and started cleaning house. And I admitted them to myself, to God, and to another person. And what I did at that point is I started to see my patterns and see where I was selfish and self-centered and where I was affected. My self-esteem was hurt and things that I'd never dealt with. And so that was a really big spiritual experience for me too, is being free of those things, asking God to remove those, because now instead of all the junk that I'd filled up my life for, God was able to fit in there, and Jesus was able to fit into my life perfectly. And to me, he was the one that I was looking for the whole time. So I went on to make amends to people. And
now, but before you go there, Jason, I mean, listen, I'm not trying to be funny, but this man is gorgeous. He's married, I know. But, blonde hair, blue eyes, you're talented. You have all these great things happening. And you just disclosed about the self-esteem, because a lot of times, honestly, like people look at you and they say, oh, you have it together. You're it, right? And then you're struggling with this thing, right, that makes you look for other things, whether it's drugs, sex, anything, right. Shopping addictions, whatever. What was the self-esteem thing that was going on? Like, what was it in you? Like, what was the void? I'm trying to figure it out. Like, what was the self-esteem thing that you were struggling with?
Well, all of us are looking for we have fear. We have this thing called self-centered fear. And we're afraid that either somebody's going to find out something we did, or we're not going to get something we want, or that it's a selfish, self-centered thing. And for me, that void that I was trying to fill up was, then the self-esteem was, at an early age, I learned how to get love through doing well at certain things. Like like in sports, I was really good in sports, and I went to the Olympic Training Center for speed skating and wrestling and did a lot of different things like that. And the better I did, the more pats on the back I got. And I was like, oh, that's where I get my love, because my relationship by this time was more or less based on the world and not on the relationship with God, which is the real fulfillment. So yeah, that self-esteem, I developed performance-based acceptance. So the better I did, the more I felt accepted. And I used that for a long time. So I had drugs and alcohol at the same time. The better I did, the more that I felt that I was filling up those things. But by the time I got to a place where I was homeless, I was full of all this junk that wasn't really fulfilling my life. I thought if I got a record deal that that everything was going to be fine. Got the record deal, I was still there. All my junk was still there. So I really believe that the self-esteem issues are in all of us, and it's how we deal with it and how we find, we're born selfish. What I mean by this is, the only way I can explain this is if we take, say, 10 2-year-olds and put them in a room and give them one ball. Every single 2-year-old, that is my ball. That is my ball. But you know what ultimately makes us feel good is giving. What ultimately makes us feel good is loving. It's by loving that we're loved. It's by giving that we are given. It's by forgiving that we're forgiven. And to me, I had it all backwards. And we do as human beings. I mean, we're selfish at nature, in our nature, and we want to do those things. But we find as we get older too, and I found, through the program Celebrate Recovery and everything, that the more that I poured into people and the more that I gave, and the more that I helped others, the more that I got. And I believe that the two greatest commandments for me, love God and then love your neighbors. And I think that loving our neighbors is why we're here. Because, if God didn't want us to be happy, he wouldn't make it feel so good, you know?
And even in all of those processes, Jason, you actually, when you were in recovery and you're going through your self-inventory, you start writing these things down, and then you come up with your first album, essentially. You probably didn't even know it, right? Letters from the Inside, right?
I couldn't make it up. I couldn't, but the thing about music and Letters from the Inside is is where I was, what happened, and where I'm at, and I had to get that record out. I had to tell people that there is hope, that it's okay to feel lost, but that if you do reach out, that and you knock on the door, it'll be open. And I had to do that in order to get it out of my soul too, because it's a chronicle of where I was and all of the drug addiction and alcoholism and the struggles that I went through just being a human being. And so it's a really growth record. It was a stepping stone to my new record, I Fall In. But I believe that people really see the truth in music. They can feel the truth. You know how you can hear, it doesn't matter what type of music it is, but when you hear it, you're like, man, that just sounds like it's truthful and it's meaningful. And that connects with people. And so when I'm singing about the truth and singing about my story and writing words about redemption and grace and what God can do in your life and what he's done in my life, it comes through as being the truth, and that's what connects with people. At first, I did not want to tell my story because it's kind of embarrassing at first, but when I started telling my story, I started seeing people relate. I mean, everybody has somebody in their family or somebody that they know that's struggling with drugs and alcohol, struggling with being lost, struggling with finding true grace and being forgiven, and finding that forgiveness and being whole. So we all struggle with that, and Letters from the Inside is the beginning of that, and I Fall In is my new record that actually is a collection of prayers and devotions and where I was and what's been done in my life and what I'm able to do through God.
Now, I want to talk about the title, I Fall In. What inspired the title, or what does that mean?
Well, I got together with my pastor, Jason Becker, and Billy Smiley, who is a producer out of Nashville, and he was in a band called Whiteheart, an early Christian band, and one of the pioneers of Christian music. We got together, and the song I Fall In, I wanted to stay in the truth on this record, and what I mean by that is I wanted to stay in the words of the gospel and the words in the Bible, and I wanted to stay in the direction of, like I said, the truth, because that's what's really going to come across in the songs, and I wanted to fall in completely. And I Fall In is about complete surrender, and it's by surrendering that we win. It's by actually giving our life up that we actually are able to see and able to continue to be more whole than we've ever been ever. And so I Fall In is a collection of prayers and devotions directed towards that.
And so in the prayers and devotionals, what's one devotion that you wrote that kind of helped, that continues to help you on your journey as a musician? Because they are young men, young women that are and we know media, music are some of the most challenging industries to be in, and still stay faithful to Christ and your walk with Christ. Because you can always believe, but it's like, are you living as a believer?
Well, each one of the songs is a different story. Come Alive is about being a new creation and coming alive and really being born again. And I know it sounds weird being born again, and it's kind of a cliche, but it's really what happened in my life, because I have a new life. And my old life, I never thought that I would be able to be sitting here talking to you on Fox News, even be alive and be able to play music. If I would have wrote down before I got into recovery, before I surrendered, and before I said, God help me, what I wanted to happen in my life, I would have sold myself so short, because it is way better than it ever has been. The first single from the record is called You Give Me a Reason. And it's another selection. I got together with Peter Furler, who was originally in the Newsboys, and Billy Smiley, as well as Jason Becker and I, we did the I Fall In, but and Come Alive. But on You Give Me a Reason, it's about he gives us a reason every single day. And I was searching for other things in the world. But now when I keep my eyes on God, what happens is everything else just kind of falls into place. And it's so weird because it's like, all right, you mean my priorities were messed up? Yeah, they were. I had other things above what is ultimately going to guide me to the most amazing life ever. So a lot of the songs are about that. There's another song called Smile that I have a video for, and it's a direct relation of how he can clean us up and make us new again. And it actually has a homeless guy in it and an alcoholic guy in it, and I'm helping them up. And it's funny because that was me.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
we with all of the songs, there's a lot of meaning behind each one of them, and each one of them tells a story of how I learned to find true happiness. You know.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned I thought was awesome. You and your wife have a foundation called Hearts.
Hearts Across Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. And you work with people and you help to pull them up.
Right.
And like you said, the second commandment, love thy neighbor, and that servant leadership. How does helping others get you closer to your purpose?
That's a great question. And Hearts Across Atlanta, it's my wife Tiffany and Lauren, her friend, have started it. And what we do is we actually get together in Atlanta and we bring toiletries, we bring clothing, we bring food, we bring love to the homeless. And it is by loving on others that we're loved. And so it's crazy sometimes because I'm out there and I'm singing with a lot of the homeless guys and the vets, and you know, some of them are mentally ill, some of them have addictions, and we're loving on them, and that was me, you know, that was me out there. A lot of times we get ministered to because next thing you know, we're singing and dancing, and they are. It's a wonderful way not only to get out of ourselves, but to do truly what makes us feel ultimately happy. And you're talking about serving others and how that actually allows us to be open to God. For me, it's by serving that we get out of ourselves. Because for so long, I couldn't see past my own nose because I was selfish and self-centered, trying to figure out how to get the next thing for me. But when I get out and help other people, even if it's opening up a door for somebody, I'll do that sometimes. I'll just sit there and open up the door, and next thing you know, 3 or 4, 5 people coming through, and I'm smiling at them. It's a way to get out of ourselves so that we can actually truly see where God's will is for us, you know, by trusting in Him, cleaning our house, and then helping others. It keeps me grounded in gratitude and humility. And when I'm in humility and gratitude, my life goes really well.
yes, Jason, and I can feel that. So there's this one person that's like out there, and they're like rock bottom.
Yeah.
You know, we all have those moments, or most of us have had those moments.
Yeah.
Take it back to you're on that couch before you even get kicked out of the final drug dealer's house. What's the advice that you would give to that person that, you know, is drug addicted? They're lost. They're searching. They really are yearning for something more. What's that piece of advice that you would give to them to just get them started on their journey to recovery and hope?
Well, if you're like me, you went completely to the place, or you're at the place where you want help, but it's tough because you don't want to give up. You still think that you can actually control it, but you know deep down in your heart that, for me, I knew deep down in my heart that I needed help. And I think what it really affected me was that I was knocked down so far on my knees. I had so much pain that I was willing to change. And once you get enough pain, you'll either end up in changing in a jail, institutions, or the alternative, which is death. And I didn't want to die, and I wanted to actually have a relationship with somebody again, including myself. I think that the main thing to do is try a different way. Just try it for a little bit. And when they say surrender, it's weird because when you surrender, you feel like that you're giving up, that you're a failure. But it's by surrendering that you win, because trying to a new way. I tried every way that I possibly could, and it got me to the bottom. And everybody will have a different place in their life. You don't have to go all the way down to where you're homeless. You can just go down to a place to where you're willing to try something new. Maybe try a program for a little while, maybe talk to somebody, go to a Celebrate Recovery, go to a church, go to a recovery center, somewhere where you can actually find healing. Take a little break, open your mind, stay honest, open-minded, and be willing. And next thing you know, your life can change. And if you just if you sincerely say, God, help me, watch out, hold on. Next thing you know, your life is going to spin around, and he's going to take you to places you've never ever been and never ever thought were possible. And it's amazing. So if you're out there suffering, just reach out. That's the main thing. You don't want to end up on the other side. Like, you don't want to end up, but you can end up on the other side smiling.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So what's one of your favorite scriptures? What's a scripture you stand on?
Well, my favorite one, I have to say, is being a new creation in Christ. And it's amazing to me how he can take me from the bottom and give me and make me a new creation in life. And it talks about it in 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old is gone, the new is here.